Hey y'all, welcome to the Medicine Stories podcast. This is episode 7, and I'm Amber Magnolia Hill. Today I'll be sharing my interview with Lara Veleda Vesta. But before we get into that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about a giveaway that I have going on right now. And I'm going to kind of check in on the status of the podcast, 7 episodes in. And I'm going to do a herbal tip segment again. So first, let me tell you about Lara. She's an artist, writer, educator with some amazing online courses, with a strong connection to her Northern European ancestors. She works with folk spirituality, archaic magic, mythology, ritual, women's remembrance, and just so much more. It's really vast, her body of work and the things she's interested in. So you really get a sense for it in our conversation. Some of the things we talk about are the burning times and the witch wound, the motherline, intergenerational trauma, how we're all descended from survivors, how we're never separate from our ancestors, and connecting with the ancestors via direct info from your intuition and art and ritual, and how ancestral connection is often not an intellectual path, but can be an embodied path. I tell the story of the ancestral dream that changed my life, and we talk about how the scrolls are in our bones. Lara talks about listening to the language of symbol. She tells us about Hindla, the ancient Northern European goddess of the bloodlines. I love this idea, and I hope you do too. We talk about the woven web of weird as the matrix of existence. How fate is interactive, time is non-linear, and everything is happening simultaneously. Lara also likes to say that things are both real and unreal at the same time. I really, really love that. We talk about the Disir, the support, guidance, and blessings from the sacred grandmothers of your lineage, and how it's like basically my life goal or my death goal now to become a Disir. I really just feel like that's like the role I was born to fulfill and will die to fulfill. We talk about linear time and how it separates us from nature, the ancestors, myth, and indigenous ways of thinking. And we talk about chronic fatigue syndrome and mold toxicity and invisible disabilities, and how often for women, especially at midlife, but at other ages too, we have to disregard cultural expectations in order to address our symptoms of exhaustion, trauma, and illness. Towards the end, Lara tells us the story, the ancient northern myth of Gullveig, thrice burned and yet she lives, and what it can teach us about feminine power, magic, surviving patriarchy, and healing after pain and trauma. We also talk about snake medicine and its relationship to female magic. So yeah, it's a pretty rad conversation. Okay, let me tell you about this giveaway. This is a giveaway I'm doing in collaboration with Sophia Rose of La Abeja Herbs. Sophia was the episode 3 guest. If you haven't heard that interview, is lovely, and I suggest checking it out. So Sophia is giving away to one of y'all a year-long subscription to her online learning class. It's not really a class. Well, I'll describe what it is, but it's called Garden Party. So Garden Party is a revolutionary take on online herbal education, delivered to your inbox on or around each new moon, brimming with video, audio, and written resources, both educational and inspirational. This monthly missive is a true celebration of earthly delights. It arrives dressed in its best and eager to greet you with the month's collected medicine and musings. Garden Party is an offering for anyone longing to experience deeper connection with themselves and with the earth. It is for folks who want to learn more about how to engage with plant medicine and the natural world as a whole in a way that is fun, accessible, and grounded in the small rituals of daily life. If you're a longtime subscriber to the monthly moon missive from La Abeja Herbs, Garden Party offers the opportunity to connect further with their wild musings, uncommon plant wisdom, and unique herbal how-tos. For nature lovers, as well as budding and seasoned herbalists alike, Garden Party is an invitation to engage with the world and with yourself in a way that is radical, real, and deeply transformative. I've really loved being a part of Garden Party for the last 2 or 3 months and receiving Sophia's emails. Really wasn't sure what it was at first, but as soon as I got it, like I got it. We talk about it more in the interview in episode 3, and it's just really easy to take in the information Sophia shares, and it's so well, like it says, deeply transformative. It really is. I've learned so much already. So the way that you can enter this giveaway is to go to the Medicine Stories Facebook group, and you can find that just by searching Medicine Stories within Facebook and requesting to be added. And there's going to be a post pinned to the top there, and so you will comment under the post. I think that we will end this giveaway, shut down the opportunity to enter around early February. Sophie and I both have birthdays in the first week of February, so we'll end it around then. So yeah, check that out. And speaking of places on the web where Medicine Stories is, I also have a killer Patreon page to which Lara Vesta, today's guest, has contributed some really awesome things. So patreon.com/medicine stories. It's really been amazing. I already have over 70 patrons there. Every day there's more, and I just I feel so held and supported in doing this project. I really did not know how it would be received, and have been totally blown away so far by the support. So the Patreon page has shown me that it really seems like in a couple months, like I'll have enough money there to really be able to do the podcast. Like right now, it's hard. It's like I'm fighting for the time to get out here into this little room in my neighbor's yard and record this. And, having a baby, having kids, there's just not enough time, money, energy to go around within the nuclear family. The way we're living is so hard on parents. And it's really been stressful for my family for me to put this podcast out. But the way things are going on Patreon, I think it's going to work out and I can put more shows out more frequently. I love doing this. And I love doing Patreon too. It's so well done and so well laid out for both creators and patrons. And it's been really fun coming up with offerings from myself and from my guests, and things to give to people as a thank you. So the lowest level you can pledge at is $2 a month. And that's where I give all the best stuff because I want everyone to be able to access this stuff. You can see what's available at the higher levels there. One thing that I'm going to do coming up too on the Patreon, through the Patreon app or on their website, is an Ask Me Anything. Something I really don't like doing on Instagram when I do lives. I just kind of want to talk about whatever I'm there to talk about. But I'm going to do an Ask Me Anything on Patreon coming up. So I'll announce that there on Patreon when the time comes. But what Lara has contributed to the Patreon page is 2 things. One, a PDF booklet, her Moon Divas Oracle, Wisdom, Wonder, and the Power of Place. So we talk about that in the interview here. And the other thing that she's contributed, I am loving this, is another little PDF booklet that she wrote specifically for you guys, for my Patreon supporters, because she rules. It's called Clearing the Channel, an exercise in opening to personal power. And I'm going to go ahead. So it's like a workbook. You can print it out and write in it. By Lara Veleda Vesta for Medicine Stories. I'm gonna read the first page here. In the gray world of myth and ghost, we can find the weird threads of our power glowing. And that's WYRD. We'll talk about that in this interview. We all are powerful in unique ways with rare gifts and stories to share in this sacred lifetime. Yet a world devoted to rationality and disconnection, often perpetuated life to life through lineage bonds and wounds, can obscure our gifts and block our power. To access our power fully, we must clear the channel for purpose and healing to flow. Clearing the channel is a fearless address to anything in our lives that is out of integrity. In contemporary culture, power blocks are often rooted in the witch wound, a legacy of patriarchy, capitalism, and colonial rule. What is the witch wound? A deep fear of non-conforming self, a fear of being seen and standing out, fear of conflict through use of voice or force of will to effect transformation. The first step to clearing the channel is to clearly and honestly identify where the witch wound lives in you. And then she gives tools and other things to help you find where the witch wound lives in you and work through that. It's really beautiful. Lara's an amazing artist and human being. So yeah, speaking of fear of being seen and standing out, that fear is really what kept me from doing this podcast. Even though, as I said in the very first episode, I wanted to do it for 11 years. And I finally got to the point where I did it. I didn't want to be living in that fear anymore. And I, again, just thank you, feeling so supported, loving the Medicine Pages Facebook group, loving the Patreon. And I just want to talk a little bit about the iTunes reviews, because I checked it the other day and there are 77 ratings there and some just amazing reviews. It totally blows me away. I couldn't help but notice, looking at other podcasts that I really love, because I listen to podcasts all the time and have been for years, that the ratings to episode number of episodes that are out ratio is really high. Like, it's hard to get people to go to iTunes and leave a rating or review. And it's just amazing to me that 77 of you have done it. Thank you. Even the one of you who left a 2-star rating. I'm going to read one of these reviews. So it's hard to pick just one because they're all so great, but thank you, Mary, for writing. I was having a really bad day yesterday. My own personal demons were roaring their heads. Depression, grief, anxiety. Nothing seemed to be helping. Everything seemed pointless. So I fired up my salt lamp, lit some candles, and crawled into bed with my headphones and this podcast. My nervous system immediately relaxed. It felt like coming home. I feel so inspired to learn about plants, ancestry, herbal medicine. I can't wait to hear more. I fell asleep after listening and had the most wonderful dreams. Thank you so much, Amber. I love that. I love that the podcast inspired dreams and that is calming someone's nervous system. I hope it calms everyone's nervous system. We all need that all the time. So, okay, let's talk about my little herbal tip for the day. And this is just kind of a rambling about herbal identification. That sounds so lame. Like, more about how the human is wired to recognize plants. So I think this is something that really trips people up when they're first starting out with herbalism or kind of wanting to, being afraid of IDing wrong. And like the example that I always think of, because I've seen this on Instagram a lot, is people misidentifying or confusing Queen Anne's lace or wild carrot and yarrow. And I always have to comment when I see that, because like it's just not cool to mix up your plants. You can make a real mistake in treating yourself or someone. If you are hearing these booms, I'm out in this little room in the woods in my neighbor's backyard, and it's underneath a big digger pine, and there is a squirrel up there munching on pine cones and then dropping like the core of the cone onto the roof of this room. So that's what's going on. So, when I was first seeing this, I was like, what? Like, Queen Anne's lace and yarrow look nothing alike. They're so easy to tell apart. And then I had to take myself back to the beginning of my herbal studies when I didn't know the difference between the two. And I was like, okay, I can see how they're the same, how they're really similar. They're both white. They have this umbel-shaped flowering head with multiple tiny little white flowers. But they're really very different. And here's the thing, here's the key, here's the secret, and the thing that I want to impart to you is it doesn't take very much time to train your eyes and your brain to see the difference between plants that look really similar. I think people think it does. Like, it's just, I'm going to do it wrong. I'm going to get it wrong, or it's going to take too long for me to figure it out. It's so quick because humans evolved alongside plants for millions of years. We can recognize plants just as well as we can recognize human faces. So like, you see one interview or music video or like TV show cameo from a person and you immediately like them or have a crush on them or whatever, and you're going to remember their face like forever and know who they are. It's that quick. It's that quick with plants too, if we just pay the same amount of attention to them as we do to humans. So I was thinking about this because my 16-month-old daughter, Nixie, in our backyard right now, it's been pretty warm in California all winter. We finally have gotten some rain, but there's a bunch of like springtime stuff happening basically, even though it's mid-January. And so we've got some edible greens coming up. Miner's lettuce. There's lots of violet leaves and violet flowers right now too. Chickweed, and we've got some wild mint in our yard. And it like took 2 days of us being out there and me showing her like that you can eat them, but no, don't eat that one, when she was trying to eat the one next to it, for her to get it. She's never gonna like misidentify these plants again. She goes right to them. Our friend Kat, who spends time with her a couple times a week so I can do this podcast, among other things, yesterday was like, oh my gosh, Nixie was feeding me miner's lettuce and violet leaves yesterday, and she knew exactly which ones to eat. And I was like, yeah, because I've been showing her, you know, and it took a day or two for her to know these ones I eat, these ones I don't, and this is the difference between these plants. And it's just, there's no rational thought involved with that. It's just her little mammalian, human, animal mind very quickly learning which plants are which. So don't be intimidated. It's not that hard. You were meant to do it. You know, you have plant knowing in your bones. You have plant knowing in your blood. It is in almost all of your ancestors. Only the very most recent generations lost the ability to recognize and work with plants, but it's right there, just waiting for you. So I think that's everything I wanted to cover here in the introduction. Please head over to the Medicine Stories Facebook group and enter the giveaway, and patreon.com/medicine stories if you want to access Lara's PDFs, and I've got something up there from Asia Suler and from Amy Woodruff, and just things that are my own offerings. And there's just going to be so much more. Again, really enjoying Patreon and coming up with ways to share awesome things with the people who are there supporting this work. It just means so much. Thank you to the iTunes reviewers and raters. You're the very, very best. And let's get into my conversation with Lara Veleda Vesta. Hi, Lara.
Hi.
Hi. I'm so happy to be talking to you finally. Lara and I have been following each other, and in a pretty, more than following each other, like deeply interwoven Instagram relationship ever since this summer. And this is our first time talking. It feels just so natural and so nice. I think you're one of the only people who I met on Instagram and like the next day was like, can we just like text? Can we take this friendship to the next level? I have so much to say.
Oh, I felt the same. It was very mutual. So
yeah,
really wonderful to have this connection come out of something like Instagram.
Yeah.
It's pretty special.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for it. In the second episode of this podcast, Mila, Prince, and I talked quite a bit about online connections and, you know, just how real they can be and how nourishing they can be. And so your medicine stories that you are always sharing online through your classes and Instagram and your website and everything, they're just something that I feel so strongly drawn to. And when I first was like, okay, I'm finally doing this podcast, you were first in my mind to have a conversation with. So I'm just beyond right now to be talking to you and putting this out there. So my first question is actually tied into the initial Instagram post that brought us together. It was one that I did this summer, and you commented, and that was just like the beginning of that. So I was wanting to read the post that I did, and then I'm going to ask you a question after it that sort of ties into the post. So my post was, I had a moment today while processing Yarrow, while listening to women's historian Max Dashu on the podcast On the Block. I've been following the mythic threads of my Celtic heritage lately, and it's got me thinking, really thinking about the witch hunts. So I'm reading Max's new book, based on almost 50 years of meticulous scholarship, called Witches and Pagans, Women in European Folk Religion, and really taking the information in, really immersing myself in it, and letting myself feel the reality of it. So today, working with the Yarrow, it just hit me in the gut all at once. For over a millennium, hundreds of thousands, some scholars say more, of women were burnt at the stake or drowned just for knowing about plants and birth and death and contraception and trance states and healing. At the heart of it, they were burnt for being women. The misogyny in America today runs deep, but the call women are feeling to wake up and reclaim the ways of our grandmothers runs deeper. The old ways vastly predate patriarchy. So, Lara, when you were studying and teaching at the California Institute of Integral Studies, or CIIS, you taught a class called the Motherline. And I've seen you post and share about this idea of the Motherline before. Can you tell us what that is and how it might relate to what I just read?
Sure. By the way, that post, as I'm sitting here, had chills and tears simultaneously because it's so powerful, this mother relationship that we can follow through our own bodies, through the bodies of our children, and through our direct ancestors from our own mothers and our grandmothers. And just to hear you so succinctly and beautifully talk about this memory of the feminine it's just incredibly powerful for me. So I took a class from Alka Aurora on the Motherline. It was one of the required classes in the Women's Spirituality PhD program, which I think is fantastic. And our work in the class was to really put ourselves in the context of our foremothers. So do some direct genealogical research with our known ancestors, and then look at the social constructs. And one of the things that happened in developing the story of my own motherline was this huge compassion opening up. I just taught the Ancestral Connection class, and so many of us have these boundaries and barriers with our own mothers or with the women of our lineage. And when we begin to understand the context that they lived with, and then understand this intergenerational trauma that really every woman I know has in one form or another, we develop a compassion and a love for the women of our lineage, and we can see how we are all descended from survivors, every single one of us. We're descended from survivors. If you are of European descent, you are descended from the survivors of the European witch trials, which are directly related to the colonization of the so-called New World. And if you are from a people who was colonized, you're descended from the survivors of colonial rule. We are all survivors. And that is a very powerful lineage to bear. Mm. So I'm going to cry again.
Yeah, no. There have been tears on every episode so far. Well, yeah, let's talk about connecting with the motherline. Something I saw you say recently is we can't think our way to ancestral connection. And that makes me think that when I teach classes on ancestry, I kind of separate it into there being two components, like the more thinking, rational, logical way, which is genealogy research, ancestry.com, or filling out your family tree, doing historical research into the times that these people lived, or doing a DNA test. Like, this is all rational ways of knowing. And then there's the more ritual and sort of otherworld, wider consciousness ways of connecting with our ancestors. And you really have a foot in that world. That is just something I see you share about a lot. And you teach in the Ancestral Connections class that you do online, all about that. So I'd love to know more about that. How do you connect with your ancestors? How can people connect with their ancestors? What do you mean by we can't think our way to ancestral connection?
Well, one of the things that comes up over and over again, because I had a lot, I never teach things that I actually know. I teach things that I need to learn. And so when teaching the Ancestral Connection class, I amass lots of information, but I'm always learning and processing. And so everyone who participates is helping me to learn more about how we do connect with our ancestors, because most of us don't know. And the thing that's come up over and over again for people who have lineages that are obscured, or people who are adopted, or people who have so much trauma in their lineage that they're actually terrified of, connecting with their ancestors, is that our ancestors are in our bodies. They live in our cells. We are never separate from them. We are the culmination of every single person of our lineage that ever was born and died on this planet. And that in itself can be terrifying and overwhelming, but it can also be really empowering, because for every absent piece of information, there's the direct information of your own intuition. There's your dream world. There's, the plants that speak to you, or certain regions that you're drawn to and you don't know why, or people even that you recognize. And those are all part of that information that lives within us, that lives within ourselves. And if we were, born into holistic, intact cultures, which most of us are not, then we might have some training in how to understand what's coming through us and how our ancestors speak through us. And so, because most of us don't come from that, we have to then research and find our path intuitively. And ritual is a big part of that. And when we open ourselves in ritual, and I always say things are real and not real simultaneously. So you don't have to believe in the spirit world to connect with your ancestors. I just happen to believe in everything because I think it's more fun. So in ritual, we can open ourselves to clarifying the channel of that information, to removing blockages, to, dealing with our fear, and to just sitting and seeing what comes through. Because what I've found with my own ancestors is that they're like sitting right next to me. I mean, they're here right now. They have so much that they want to say. They've been neglected for so long. They are ready to just come in, and they're the ones that pushed me to teach the class. They came, I had a dream that I needed to offer that class. And what I'm learning in working with my ancestors is to really listen. And they're going to ask me to do things that make me uncomfortable and to stretch boundaries. And as long as I'm in my practice with ritual, I can do those things and feel their support and nourishment along the way. But it is not a linear path. And it is not an intellectual path, truly. It's an embodied path. Ancestral connection is embodied.
So I'm feeling compelled to share an ancestral dream that I had in my very first short episode about what this podcast was going to be about. I talked about it, and I said that I would share this story at some point. And I don't think I've really shared it online. I talk about it in classes. And so I'm feeling excited right now to tell this to you specifically. So I had this dream when I was sleeping next to my grandmother, my paternal grandmother. And I wouldn't have remembered that if I didn't journal about it the next day. I'll always remember the dream, but recently I went back and was rereading that journal, and I found the entry for this dream, and I was like, oh my God, I was sleeping next to grandma when I had that dream. That makes it so much more meaningful, because this dream is of her lineage. And she passed 3 years ago now. And her maiden name was Wright, Wright. And so in this dream, I looked down at my right wrist, and I saw that there was like a cylindrical hole drilled in it. Like there was an empty space in my right wrist. And I was like, whoa, what happened there? And I reached into it and pulled out a scroll. And when I unfurled the scroll, it had the name William Newton Wright written on it. And that's the dream. And, because I'd been doing genealogy research, I knew that he was her grandpa. He was my dad's mom's dad's dad. And I had known her dad too. When I was little, I knew my great grandpa. That was lucky. So he was his dad, William Newton Wright. He lived and died in Arkansas. And I was like, what what is this dream all about? I knew it was big. It was one of those big dreams. But I was like, why him though? Why his name? And I'm still not entirely sure why it was his name of all the names it could have been, all the rights it could have been. Because what I eventually realized was that it was like the scrolls are in my bones. And it was kind of this wordplay, like right, and right. The last name Wright, and it's in my right wrist with which I write. And I've always been a writer, always wanted to be like a professional writer. Loved writing since I was a kid. In college, I did this women's literature course, and I wrote about my ancestors, and that professor like wrote, and I still have this too, Amber, you should write about your ancestors. Like this is your future. And so having that dream really, really is what inspired me to start writing about ancestry on my blog many years ago, like 2 blog names and incarnations ago. When I was selling vintage clothing, it wasn't even what my blog was about. But it really, got a response and kind of started me on the path I am now. And it was because I felt like this dream was just a direct revelation from someone, from something, from the ancestors maybe to write.
Oh, that's so incredible. I love that story so much. And that the scrolls are in our bones. They're in all of our bones. And that information, you're receptive to it. And so you're willing to listen in the language of symbol, which is how the ancestors speak. Most of the time we have to remember that the historical era is fairly new, meaning the era of writing is a fairly new era. So you're listening and unfurling those symbols, and that's so powerful. I love that story.
Yeah. So I was wanting to share too, because speaking about different ways that you can connect with your ancestors that aren't necessarily like genealogy research. One way is through any sort of creative act. Like you, Lara, you make this beautiful art, and that's one way that you do it. What I really felt compelled to do after having this dream was to write out a story based on that lineage. And so I knew the story of my great grandparents having my grandma's, who I was sleeping next to, older son, and him dying at 6 weeks old in Arkansas in February. And them, hitching up the mules and taking him to the cemetery in the pouring, freezing cold rain and trying to dig a grave, but the earth kept collapsing back in to the hole because it was so muddy. And I've heard this story growing up my whole life. His name is Cletus, the little baby. Oh. And so I kind of wrote like a fictionalized version of, I wrote all the facts I knew, but of course I had to like fill in some details, but it was super powerful and healing. And that's, I just offer that as a way for people to connect more intuitively, less rationally with their ancestors, do some sort of creative process. That's one ritual you can engage in.
Yes, absolutely. And envisioning their stories, really putting yourself into their stories. I learned in my research that one of my ancestors from Ireland came over when she was 11 years old. She came alone to the United States as a bonded alien. So she was basically an indentured servant and had to work off her bondage. And that was really common. But really putting myself into her story and thinking about at 11 years old, right, your daughter's age, coming across the ocean away from everything that you've ever known, and then arriving into a brand new space. And like you said, filling in from the details, filling in intuitively what that experience would have been like. And then it becomes a part of you. And that's, Stephen King says fiction is the truth inside the lie. And I've always believed, that's actually my writing background is in fiction. I've always believed that fiction is true. When you make a story, you make it true. And so you're honoring your ancestors by telling their stories as truth, by visioning them deeply, they become real again. And so that's how we live. We live through story. you know that story. Now your daughters will know that story, and then their daughters will know that story. And you're sharing it now with a wide audience. So your ancestors live on. It's so powerful. And that is what I do with art too. Absolutely, is try and bring into the art this greater story of, the beings like the runes or the mythological figures from my ancestral work.
Oh, well, just leading me right into the next question. So you introduced me to this deity, this being, Hindla. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about her. I just really powerful. It's so beautiful that this concept even exists anywhere out there. And I would love to, just introduce more people to it and, bring her back.
So Hindla in the Northern European spiritual traditions, she is a giantess and she is the goddess of the bloodlines. So she knows the genealogy of not just humans, because in the Northern European tradition, there's many races and like elves and dark elves and the giants and the gods and the earth gods. And there's just many beings, and she knows the genealogical information of all. So there's a mention of her in, I believe, one of the sagas, and where Freya comes to see her, the goddess Freya comes to see her in her mountain hall, and Hinla starts this huge recitation of a genealogical line. But I see her very much as a weaver of weird, because that weird is the concept of that, everything in the universe is connected in this beautiful web.
And this is WYRD.
Mm-hmm. WYRD. And so I see Hinla as someone who has her fingers in the weird, someone who can pull your weird forward for you and let you know what, whether there's tangles in your thread, maybe from your lineage, or where there might be a tear that needs repairing. And she's really powerful because she knows where we all come from. And that's something that, humans especially tend to forget. We tend to forget that we are all connected.
Yeah, so let's just start like a big Hindla cult. Everyone just start lighting a candle to Hindla. But it's just so powerful. And thank you for illuminating more, because there's not much about her online. I've done a lot of searching since you gave me that name, and there's not a whole lot. So let's bring her back. And that's just so beautiful. The goddess of the bloodline. I'm so moved by it. And you're bringing up the concept of weird. Can you please talk more about that?
Oh boy. Well, weird is woven. Weird is the thread of fate or destiny, and it is the fabric of the universe. Everything shimmers in the weird. If we were to take away the cellular form of the world and all of the elements in it, we would just see this shimmering fabric. And weird, when I say weird is woven, it's because weird is seen as being the purview of the Norns, who are the triple goddess figures, also giantesses, by the way. The giantesses are really important in Northern European spirituality. And they emerged at the beginning of the world from either a lake or a pool or a well at the base of the world tree. And they work to create, to weave, to spin, and to cut and modify the web of weird. And so there's all of this information, and Max Dash's book, of course, is great for discussing weird and the Norns and some of the folk traditions that were invoked to appease the Norns, especially for laboring women or in childbirth, because you want their blessing on your life. You want the blessing of the Norns on your children so that the weird will be woven smooth and won't be knotted. But I love the concept of weird, and I love it because it is also the root of the English word weird, which, is like weirdo, which I fully invoke and embody on a daily basis. But I love this idea of fate. I've always loved the idea of fate being interactive. So yes, the Norns have the weird in their hands, and yet it is the choices that we make that impact how it is woven for the future. So it's not all things are predestined. Some things are, but much of it is changeable, and it's changeable by our actions, which I think is really important, especially in the world we're living in now, to know that we can change the weird.
So many thoughts, so many questions racing through my mind. Like, okay, do I go back? Do I go forward? What do we do? But let's keep right now with this sort of mythical thread of Northern Europe, where you have like direct, very close Scandinavian ancestry, which is, why you feel pulled to this, and you're just really such an expert in this area. The Disir. Is that, am I saying that correctly? Please tell me about them.
Disir.
Disir.
So we all have Disir. Disir are, sometimes they're called the little Norns. So there's a concept of the Norns. One of the things that it was just a revelation for me as I started studying mythology is realizing that, time is nonlinear. Okay. And then everything is happening simultaneously. So, and then that things can be multiple and singular at the same time. And so for, most of us Western trained brained people, we're so used to things being categorical, but in myth and to the ancient peoples of many spiritual traditions, things weren't categorical. They were incredibly mutable. And so the Norns are both the triple goddesses at the base of the world tree, and they're these ancestral spirits too, who also go by the name the Disir. And the Disir are the sacred grandmothers of the lineage. And their job is to protect you and your descendants, because they love you, because you're their line. And so all of us have these Disir, these sacred grandmothers that, gather around us whenever we need extra help and support. And there's actually a festival, I believe it's right about this time of year between Samhain and Yule, the winter solstice, where they have a festival for the Disir and really celebrate and honor the sacred grandmothers, because they are the reason that we're here. They are the ones that birthed us into being. And then they also are the keepers of the lineage for the next generation. So, and I love them. I've done this exercise in classes where we've envisioned our Disir, back a generation and then another generation, and then back, 1,000, 2,000 years. So then the room just filled with this concept of these sacred grandmothers holding us all. And it was just very loving and powerful. So it doesn't matter what tradition you're from, you literally have grandmothers in your lineage. And I believe that many of them would want to love you and benefit you as you go forward in life. So working with them can be so powerful. And to me, it's just soothing. It's like a heart melt.
Yeah, I mean, that made me cry just thinking about that, thinking about being held by my grandmothers. And then I think about how much I love my own daughters and want and care about their descendants going forward. And like, maybe someday I'll get to be a Disir.
Yes. Yes.
I think I'd be really good at that.
I'd be great at it.
That reminds me of something that I was really struck by upon rereading Max's book, Near Samhain in late October, when I was preparing to teach a class on ancestral herbalism with Mila Prince, which I was just so drawn. I kept rereading the passages about this ancient, or, medieval, I don't know if ancient is the right word for that, but, the Middle Ages European practice of women sitting on the grave sites of their ancestors. And one thing I've really learned from Max is that you can really tell what the Christian fathers were freaking out about, the pagan women doing, by how they ranked like sins in their edicts. Basically, like they put out these edicts to send to their subordinates, like, okay, stamp this out, don't let the pagans do this, don't let the women do this. And like the first thing on the list was stop them from sitting on graves, because what they were doing was communing with their ancestors at this very powerful portal spot. And she mentioned specifically, like, that they were talking to the Disir. They were asking for those blessings. They were asking for the support and the guidance from the grandmothers.
Mm.
Yeah. So in my class, I was like, if you know where your ancestors are buried, like, go sit on that grave. We do a lot of cremation now, but it makes sense to me that, that's literally your ancestors become the land at that point, with their body being in there for so long. So sitting on that piece of land is so powerful. And you mentioned like being outside of time, and I had wanted to kind of tune into that thread earlier when we were talking about art and creative writing and fiction and things, because when you are engaging in an artistic or creative process like that, you are like collapsing time. You are outside of time. Mm-hmm. So working with these fictionalized versions of our ancestors' lives, we are making them present. I recently... Okay, so the book that we have both read by Sandra Easter, called Jung and the Ancestors. Mm-hmm. Who is it that she's quoting? I think it might be Vine Deloria, talking about a certain Native American concept. And this is true in like all indigenous cultures that I've read about, that they speak about the past as if it's present. Mm-hmm. And so instead of an example that I gave in a blog post that I wrote, instead of me saying, oh, my dad back in the 80s took his first sip of alcohol that now has led to his alcoholism, I can say, like, my dad is taking that first sip of alcohol, and his dad is taking that first, and his dad, because this line of alcoholics goes back really far on my dad's side. Or my great-grandparents are burying their baby in a rainstorm right now. Mm-hmm. Any comment you can make in the past tense, just try to make it in the present tense, especially when working with your ancestors or any historical event or person that feels meaningful for you. And kind of starting from there is just a radical reconceptualization, so foreign to us in the West, that can, like I said, just kind of collapse time and bring us into a different state of consciousness in which we can engage with these beings.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, yes. That the idea of time, I did an exercise last year with my expository writing students where, they were always so focused on like getting through the semester. They just wanted to get the grade and be done. And so we put this timeline up on the board. I'm like, okay, so you get done with the semester and then what happens? And we basically mapped out this timeline. Then you graduate, and then you get a job, and then maybe you get married, and then you have kids, and then what? And then you retire, and then what? And then you die, right? And this linear time frame is so discouraging because it separates us from nature. Nature's time frames are nonlinear. It separates us from our ancestors. The ancestral timelines are nonlinear. It separates us from myth, separates us from cultures that have a different concept of time, like you just spoke about Native American cultures. We then become so isolated in our linearity that we can't open and connect with each other. We can't open and connect with our past, and we can't open and connect with our future. We are just totally isolated entities on a linear track. And I had, there was a man who came and presented at Pacific University a long time ago. He's from an organization called Communitecture, which does like the village building convergence up in Portland. And he's a designer, a community designer, and he said we have to get off the grid of our thinking. And that just really struck me. Like, we're on this grid and we don't need to be. We can be in a spiral, we can be in a circle, we can be in organic shapes, we can be in a web. It can be chaotic and it's okay. And when you allow yourself to, like you said, make the past present through our tenses, for example, and you can just continue to expand the opportunities for connection by examining things like the pronouns we use when we speak about things, everything, right? When we examine just our own relationship with place, where are you gridding yourself up and where can you open? And that opening invites so many possibilities because then you've already achieved everything that you set out to achieve. And you already are beginning again. And you've already died. And you're being born. And it's all happening right now. So in that, you're connected to everything that exists from the past and the future. Done, right?
That is so comforting. And just hearing those words, I feel like worlds of possibility open up before me.
Yes, it's all possible then in that moment. And you're never alone. You're always surrounded and loved and cared for and connected. And that truly is the potential of this existence, is like, how deeply connected can we be? And how open can we be to those connections?
And in my experience, the more open to the connections and the more I'm paying attention to these synchronicities and dreams and ancestral messages and all these mythic threads that come to me, just like the more magical my life becomes, the more my dreams come true and things fall into place. And and that's, I think I've said this a number of times already on this show, but that's the whole point of this show for me, is to encourage other people to do that, to follow their own mythic threads so that they can experience the magic that we've just had beaten out of us in this culture. And can you say again what that man said about like thinking off the grid?
We have to get off the grid of our own thinking. We've been
so good.
If you look at housing developments, we've been instructed to live our lives as if we were in a, typical like 1950s housing development instead of an organic and beautiful, mountain village, right? Mm-hmm. And so, getting off the grid is, for me, because I have that grid thinking in me. I've been trained by this culture too. Mm-hmm. And it's what makes me happy. I can then delight in the joy of my day, even in the midst of, chaos and hardship. I know that I'm not alone, and I know that everything is here to support me because we are the moment. We are the past, present, and future. So discomfort is temporary when you are being held in the matrix of all existence.
Yeah, to go further with your housing metaphor, I remember so clearly, and this is so funny to me, that sometime in the 90s when I was like a adolescent or teenager, going with my mom and my sister to visit our cousin's new house. And it was like her new house, so cool. And it was like in a tract housing development, and I had never been in one before. And I was like, what the hell is this? I was like, this is so weird. I was like, why are they all the same? Like, it felt so weird to me, and it still really does. And I visited her like a couple years ago and was like, this is just as weird as it was then. And it just feels spirit crushing. It really does. And it's so, that's clearly a metaphor for so much of how we just get the spirit like beat out of us in this culture. And so many of us are on a path of reclaiming. And for me, I know my rational mind is a beast and it dominates, and I really have to work hard to step out of it. And so I think I'm pulled toward people like you and other teachers and friends because you guys help me to kind of set that aside and remember that there are other ways of being and other ways of connecting. So let's keep going with this linear time thing. Something that you said on the Starseed Survival podcast recently really struck me. Like I pulled over in my car and wrote it down and based the whole blog post that I recently mentioned off of it about like living in linear time and women's weariness and women's wellness and our ancestral voices. So what you said on that show was, I become symptomatic when I'm not able to disregard linear time. Mm. And so I'd like to just open it up for you to talk about the really deep healing journey that you've been on recently. And I'm going to throw another Lara quote at you and see if you can touch on this when you're in there too, because I thought this was great. You said that your doctor told you not to be American about healing.
Yes. Oh, so yeah. So I've had health issues for quite some time. Started with a uterine infection that went undiagnosed for 2 years, and then
oh my God, Lara, I've had those too.
Did you?
Yeah, I had like PID. Was it pelvic inflammatory disease?
Yes.
Yeah,
yep.
That's been a big yeah.
Yep. So I didn't know that I had it, and I was just sick and I come like from super healthy people and you know, would never get sick at all and did incredible feats of superhuman ability after my divorce when I was single parenting and working full time. And this thing just knocked me down but went on antibiotics and it cleared up. And then about a year later, it took me some time to come back from that. And then about a year later, we moved into a house in Portland, and every winter I would get pretty sick again, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then last winter, I became severely ill, like bedridden, and was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and had a series of really bizarre symptoms for, like I said, for a long time. But this was being unable to be out of bed for longer than half an hour at a time, orthostatic intolerance where I couldn't stand up for long periods of time, extremely low blood pressure, low grade fevers constantly. It was awful. And I left my job. I had to quit teaching mid-year and left my PhD program. And then I was not healing. I was not coming back from it. I felt a little bit better in the spring and then in the summer, which has kind of been my pattern over the last 4 years. And then in the fall, I started feeling worse again. And I got a phone call from a friend who said, Lara, you've got to look at mold. And I did. And it was mold. I had a suppressed immune system, and I went and lived in a house with Stachybotrys mold for 4 years. And last summer, we had a leak, and the mold came into my son's room, and I cleaned it up with my bare hands. And then they opened up the wall in the bathroom, and the toxins from the mold went everywhere. And it turns out I have a genetic condition where I don't process mold toxins, so they accumulate. So what I have is mold poisoning.
So is that why some people are just so sensitive to mold and devastated by its effects and others don't seem to be affected?
That's one of the reasons, yes. And it's 25% of the population has a genetic issue with processing biotoxins. Wow. So it's a pretty large amount of people. Mm-hmm. And So then I got out of the mold house 7 weeks ago and started on a protocol of saunas and binders. And I'm like a new person. And I'm not, healing, you say, I'm going to throw an Amber quote at you because I love this quote so much, but that healing is open-ended and endless. And I truly feel that. I feel like this has been an initiation. And when my doctor said, don't be American about it, she meant it's, two steps forward, one step back. I was just re-exposed to some things from the old house this week and had an immediate setback. And
So yeah, I was going to add that you got rid of most of your possessions during this move because they're mold infested,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, everything actually. All of our stuff except for metal, glass, ceramic, and clothes that were less than a quarter of an inch thick
Mm.
that could be laundered, and everything had to be cleaned. But yeah, because it's the toxins from the mold. That mold has toxins, kind of like bees have venom, and they're very tiny and pervasive, and they get into everything. And Stachybotrys is really, really toxic, and can actually, it's been known to cause death in humans and animals. It's highly toxic. It's toxic to every major system in the body. So yeah,
So no wonder you felt so bad for
yeah,
so long. Because yeah, when we first connected, you hadn't figured out the mold thing yet, and you were just like you said in bed all the time and not sure. That must have been really hard to be in a space of why do I feel so bad? And I don't know why.
yes, yes, it was. And having a chronic fatigue diagnosis was really not helpful, because that is, that has no answers in conventional medicine at all. And I just felt so isolated and discouraged. And I just want to say I really appreciate the chronic fatigue community, because that is a very real illness. And I do think that, I have some underlying autoimmune issues that caused my mold reaction to be so strong. So it will get sorted. We'll see what kind of health I end up with, but I feel more like myself than I have in years. And it's only been 7 weeks. It's really, really been dramatic and incredible. So, but
Was the CFS label also kind of hard to wear because so many people don't understand what that is. People think it's not real, especially because it's mostly women who suffer from chronic fatigue syndrome. Can you talk a little bit
yeah.
about that, maybe?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that label, and there's so many different names for CFS, and there's over 1 million sufferers in the United States, and there's virtually no funding going into research for the cause of this illness. And it is devastating. People who are, some people are suffering and bedridden for years, tens of years, or can't leave their homes or can't tolerate light. I mean, it's got so many manifestations, but I believe it impacts women. I think it's 2 times as much as men, but it might be more than that. I can't remember the statistic exactly, but it is considered to be a female illness, an illness of the feminine. And it is women in their midlife who are most likely to be symptomatic. And I think that, on a spiritual level or a psychological level, we have to look at that too, and just really hold presence for people with invisible disabilities, because I know that, mold is part of my cause, but I also know there's so many other variables that go into chronic illness and chronic pain. And we suck in this culture at supporting people who have chronic health issues. And the medical community is really poor at it. And then as a community overall, we have a long way to go with understanding how to help people with chronic health issues feel like they belong and are included and are alive in this world.
Mm. So how does your statement, I become symptomatic when not able to disregard linear time, relate to all of this and to the fact that it's mostly women in midlife that suffer from this?
Well, like so many women in midlife, I have, for about a decade, I've been under extreme stress and had a lot of trauma. And that relates to being a divorced single mother for a time and then repartnering and being in a co-parenting relationship, which was very challenging. And in the meantime, trying to work and support a family and having all of the other constellations of pressures that come with just being a woman in this culture. And I think that when I disregard linear time, I'm also disregarding all of the enculturated expectations that are on me. Like I'm saying, it's okay to let go of this today. It's okay to prioritize my self-care, my needs right now before I take care of my children, before I take care of my partner, before I, grade another paper. And those things, being able to put myself first, I sometimes think, and I'm only speaking for myself here, but I've thought about this a lot because I've had plenty of time lying down to think that sometimes and I don't think that I caused my illness or created it. So I'm speaking simultaneously, but I was not able to meet my own needs without being ill. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's a really awful place to be, but my illness gave me insight into the importance of living in a nonlinear way and meeting my needs, prioritizing myself so that I can be healthy, so that I can support and nourish others. Because otherwise I don't. I'm so programmed to not do that.
Mm-hmm. And to keep going, checking off the never-ending to-do list.
Yes. Yeah, because it is never ending.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much shame and judgment. And, I talk a lot about story work too. Like my old story is all about doing for others and putting myself to the side. And I don't live in that reality anymore because I couldn't. For this whole past year, I've had to put myself first, and that I've realized that doesn't mean that I've abandoned my family or people I care about. It means that I've been able to learn to live in new ways. So, and I'm still learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that we all, especially women in midlife, we have to unlearn what we've been taught, what has been modeled for us. If anyone is really resonating with this, I came across an article. It's on Oprah's website, and I think it's called The New Midlife for Women, something like that. And it just really breaks down what women and our generation, women who are now like in their 30s, 40s, 50s, are facing that previous generations of women haven't had to face. Really different societal expectations. Our parents are living longer, so they're still alive. We're taking care of them and our kids. And it's just it's like the most stressful time for women ever. So, so it's an important conversation. And it's just been, I'm sure, a blessing for so many women to have your work and your writings and your really honest sharings out there. So thank you. You've taught me a lot.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm continuously inspired by you, and I'm inspired by all of the women who I come in contact with who are, doing this work in their own ways, in their own homes and families. And then we're creating new models for our children, which, I have 3, and they're not going to grow up with the expectation that dinner's going to be ready when they come home from school.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I do that with my 11-year-old. She's like, "Can we please play this board game together?" I'm like, "No, I love you. I love you so much, and I'm taking a bath right now, and you can't come in." And then tomorrow we'll play this board game, but I have to take care of myself right now.
Yes.
So switching gears. I love that you really have this background in myth in a more formal, structured setting than I do. I really wish, I majored in religious studies at UC Davis, and I didn't know that CIIS existed or Pacifica Graduate Institute, and I really feel like that's what I was looking for. Was those bigger, deeper looks at how humans make meaning and depth psychology or whatever you want to call it, mythology, these bigger women's spirituality, you were getting a PhD in. Like, that's just so cool that
Yes.
that exists. So that's kind of beside the point, that whole rant, but I wanted to ask you, you mentioned this story that you really resonate with. Can you tell me this woman's name? Can you pronounce it?
Gullveig.
Gullveig.
Hmm. Hmm.
So you said to me when we were emailing about this interview, when I encountered the story of Gullveig, I finally understood the path of magic and the transformational potential of suffering. Her story offers clues for survivors of trauma, and as survivors of patriarchy, that means all of us. It also contains some potentials for partnership, healing through teaching, and sharing our power. That sounds really cool. I don't know this story at
Hmm.
all. Can you tell us the story and talk about it?
Yes, I can. Oh, I love Gullveig. Just hearing you say her name gives me goosebumps.
It's fun to say.
She so in the poetic Edda, so the Eddas are the ancient stories of Northern Europe that were transcribed in the 13th century. And in the poetic Edda, there's a poem called the Voluspa, which is basically the sayings of the vulva, or the story of the vulva. And the story goes that Odin, the high god, descends down to the underworld, and using magic, he wakes a vulva who's a seeress or a priestess or a carrier of power or a witch. And she's one of the most ancient beings in all of the nine worlds. And she tells the story of Gullveig. She says, I remember the war, the first in the world. So the vulva has a memory that goes back to the beginning of time. And she remembers a time before war. And then she remembers the first war. And the first war was caused when the Aesir gods, there's two groups of gods and goddesses in Norse myth. One are the Aesir, and one are the Vanir. And the Vanir are like the agricultural gods, and the Aesir are like the sky gods. And so the sky gods came and they stole this goddess Gullveig from the Vanir, and then they burned her. And they burned her 3 times and stuck her with spears. And it says, thrice burned, and yet she lived. So 3 times they burned her. And she lived through that initiation, and she didn't just live, she transformed. So the name Gullveig means like gold drink. And she transforms into the goddess Heid. And Heid means shining. So she takes that gold imbued essence that is herself, and it shines forth from her after this initiation. And then she travels around as a vulva, teaching the magic of Seed or Sadir. It's got several pronunciations depending on where you're coming from, but it's a specific feminine form of magic that she teaches to women. And that is how the first magic came to women in the stories. And it's interesting because the Vanir and the Aesir make peace after Gullveig's initiation, and they exchange hostages. And Odin, who is an Aesir god, actually goes to the goddess Freya, who is a Vanir goddess, and asks her to teach him the magic of Sadir or Seed. And she does. And so there's this sharing of information and eventual intermarriage between the gods and the goddesses. And there's this idea that a possibility in this story that the Vanir are actually like representative of old European civilization before what archaeologist Maria Gimbutas calls the Kurgan invasions of the Indo-Europeans. And so the Vanir represent kind of a peaceful existence that was maybe more matrifocal. And then the Indo-Europeans are a patriarchal, sky god focused group. And they came in and invaded, and there was this act of violence that occurred. But if you look at that transformational potential in that act of violence, what happens after that violence is committed is she becomes something else. She becomes this bringer of magic to women. And then there's healing, and there is peace after that occurs. And I feel like in that story, there's so many potential seeds for what our initiations can bring to us, what our difficulties, our challenges, our pains, our traumas can do for us in terms of bringing us into our magic. And then also how to survive patriarchy, which right now is, had its good long run. And I think that we have all been harmed by it, and it's time to move forward. So how do we do that? Through partnership and through sharing information. And I think that story holds some of the keys for that.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering when you were speaking if the word vulva and vulva have a similar root. So I looked up vulva real quick, and these are, on Wikipedia, there's three things. Vulva may refer to a pagan Norse shaman, a genus of sea snails, or a cup-like structure at the base of a mushroom. That's like the coolest word ever. So many meanings.
It's such a great word. That was the word that inspired, the names of the witches illustration too, which is also from Max Dashu's book. Just, wanting to visually see other names for women's power, so we can find our own names for our own power. What do you call yourself is always the question that, or what do I call myself is always a question that women tend to ask, especially those of us who have really weird WYRD and weird work in this world. And so finding names for our magic, I think, is really valuable and important. And vulva, there's a lot of historical information about the vulva. So it's really fun to investigate if anyone wants to explore further.
Where can people see? So this drawing that you're talking about is something that you did. You sent it to me. I have a hard copy of it hanging in my living room. Names of the Witches. Is there somewhere online that people can see that?
Yes, absolutely. So you can find it. I have a Society 6 page where some of my art is living, and the Names of the Witches is there. And you can actually buy a print there, and I give all the proceeds to Max Dashu's Suppressed Histories archives because I love and value her work so much. And that's another place where listeners might want to go and do some exploring, because she is cross-cultural and cross-global and just has this huge wealth of information to offer. So
yeah, and if you want to get more into these specific names that Lara puts into this piece and, deeper etymologies than that is in Max's book, Witches and Pagans.
Mm-hmm.
Fingers crossed that Max will be on this podcast someday.
She will. Of course she will.
Yeah, she's been on a lot of podcasts lately. So anyone who's interested, just put her name into like your podcast search in the app or iTunes or wherever you get it. And she's been on a lot in the last year since her book came out. I've listened to every single one of them. Okay, I think we're getting near the end. I thought that maybe you could share a dream that I haven't heard yet. You just mentioned it briefly when we were emailing about this interview, a dream about a viper, and then maybe touch a little bit on snake symbolism. I think this is powerful for women in general. And I've had two powerful snake dreams in the last couple months myself, and I never had dreamt of the snake before. So yeah, please tell us about this dream. Sounds really cool.
So this dream came to me. I was in a really unhealthy relationship in between my divorce and kind of my reemergence into myself. I was in a relationship that was just not serving me and out of integrity. And I was looking for a way to end it, but it was very difficult because this was with a person who was in a position of power in my life. And then I had this dream. I was afraid to end the relationship. I was afraid of what it would mean for me. And I had this dream that I was driving in my car. I had a 240 Volvo station wagon at the time. And I had all of the women in my life in this car. Like every single one of them was in the car with me. My daughter, my mother, my grandmothers, and all of my friends, and every woman I'd ever known. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, and they would like cycle through. And we're driving down a dark road, in the woods, and a motorcycle was in front of us, and the motorcycle crashed. And so we get out of the car in the middle of the woods, and I walk up to the motorcycle, and on the axle was mounted the head of a cougar, and out of the mouth of the cougar came a viper, and it was yellow and orange. And I knew that if it bit any of the women in my life, they would die. It was deadly and it would harm them. And so I picked up the viper and I started running through the forest toward a cabin. And the viper was squirming and writhing. It was so visceral, this dream, and it bit me, and it bit me on both wrists. And I ran into the cabin, and all of the women in my life were in the cabin, and they had a giant soup pot in the center of the cabin. And we put the viper in, and they closed the lid. And then in that moment, I knew that I was immune to the poison, that I could face whatever I was afraid of, and I would be fine. I was safe. And so I actually had the viper bites tattooed on my inner arms. And then several years later, long after I'd ended the relationship and come into different work, I had the snakes tattooed on my arms as well, just owning the feminine, and also my relationship with it as being willing to stand out, come forward, stand up, and show that I am of the snake, which is such an ancient symbol for female magic and has been demonized. Of course, the classic Garden of Eden story with the serpent is, what everyone turns to. But there's a reason for the snakes being so present throughout all of history in the symbolism of the feminine. And if we go back far enough, we can see that it was a symbol of, very ancient wisdom and transformation, the ability to continuously shed what no longer serves us and come into new form, come into new self, new shape. So that's my dream, my snake dream. And right after
incredible.
that, I ended the relationship and everything changed. My whole life changed.
Yeah. So. Yeah. It sounds like, one of those true initiation dreams.
Yes. Yeah, it absolutely was. And I return to it again and again. Anytime I'm faced with fear, I look down at the snakes on my arms and I know that I'm okay. I'm immune to the poison. It's not going to hurt me.
It also kind of speaks to your role as like a wayfinder for women.
Yeah, the wayfinder juggling the snake through the woods.
Yeah, like, protecting the women from it, and then that it bites you on the wrist, and all this creative work that you do with your hands now too. I just, that's incredible. I love, these are the kind of dreams that I want to be exploring on this show. I said once that, like, I promise I'm not gonna share boring dreams with my listeners, just the big dreams. For me, the snake, what I think about a lot with the symbolism is like the belly being on the earth, and how in communion with the earth through just this very like sensitive, porous part of the body the snake is. And this dream that I had just like a month ago, it's just like one image from the dream. It's not a whole story. Was just like a snake's head, like the rest of its body was gone on the ground. And for me, it just spoke so clearly to what I was saying earlier, that I'm just like too in my head, too rational, too involved in thought. And so reflecting on that dream since then, I've really been trying to be in my body more. I've been like dancing and moving and stretching and breathing and trying to stop myself when I'm like, and now I gotta do this, and now I do that, and now this and that, and I'm efficient and I'm productive and I'm getting shit done. So that was my little snake dream.
Oh, that's good though. That's such a good one. It's just the embodiment aspect of that is so beautiful. And when did we ever decide that dancing wasn't getting shit done? I don't understand when that happened. Like,
yeah.
Or eating, or I was thinking about this before we started this interview, like peeing. Why am I always procrastinating going to the bathroom? I don't get it. It's like such a mom it's a reflexive mom thing. And
Yeah.
it comes back to that idea of taking care of
Yeah. I
yourself.
really do that with food. Like I'll just all of a sudden be like, I am so hungry right now. And then I just end up eating like chips to just like stave off the hunger as quickly as possible because
Mhm.
I'm like, well, I'm working. I like, there's no time to cook. I'm working.
Oh, stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for making me think about how much that is not working for me. Okay, so we're gonna close up here. I'm gonna ask you in a little bit to talk about where people can find you. You have books and a bunch of awesome online classes coming up, and other things I want you to talk about. But you are going to offer something for my Patreon supporters. This would be for people who are at the $2 a month level, so really accessible to almost everyone. I'm very grateful to you for doing this. That I am loving Patreon. It's so well done and easy to navigate for both the supporters and the creators. And it's just, I feel really excited that maybe I'll get to sustain this podcast, if
Oh,
Patreon keeps working.
I love Patreon too, and I am a supporter because I believe in this work. I believe in what you're doing. It's such an easy way to support creators, and I have a Patreon account as well, and I just want to say that it is such a lovely gift to have a $2 a month contribution from someone. I mean, that is such a beautiful thing. Um, so yes, I want to give your Patreon supporters an exercise to really help them unblock and clarify their channel for allowing their power to come through. And this specifically relates to something I call the witch wound, which prevents us from really stepping forward into our power. So if anyone is struggling with, fear or trepidation or even confusion and overwhelm around what they should be doing or how to get into a different place with regard to their power, then this exercise can be really useful. And then the other thing I want to offer your Patreon supporters is a free download of the Moon Divas Oracle book. This is an oracle that I created, and you can actually print the book, and it has all of the cards in it as coloring sheets. So you can use it as an oracle even without having the cards that go with it. So those are my presents.
Thank you, Laura. And
You're welcome.
please tell us more about your books and your online classes.
Yes. So I have the first book I wrote was the Moon Divas Guidebook, which is a handwritten, illustrated book for women in transition. And that, like, pretty much is all of us all the time, as I'm learning.
Mm-hmm.
And that book is also available as a free download on my website. I really love to just give my work wherever I possibly can. And the Moon Divas Guidebook has always had a free option and has not been a barrier at all to sales because it's just it's so in alignment with my flow and my purpose. And then I have a full course schedule because I'm feeling like I can teach again. I have a full course schedule planned out for 2018, including practice with the runes, which begins on the winter solstice, that will run for 33 weeks, taking us all the way till August, a rune a week for 33 weeks. The power class, which is like a deepening of the exercises I just spoke of over 5 weeks, really coming into alignment with our power so we can make big change in our lives and in the world. And then the Moon Divas initiation process, which is a 3-month long process delving into the work of the Moon Divas Guidebook. And the last class on the agenda, though there may be more in the works, is the beginning of a cycle class I'm calling Dark Goddess, which is the sacred art of death transitions. And really delving into death transitions, endings in a way that I did not in the Moon Divas Guidebook, because that's been a big part of my experience over the last several years and so important to living our lives in fullness, coming into alignment with death transitions. So I'm so excited about them all. I can't wait.
Me too. I'm so glad you're feeling better because you have so much in you and so much to offer. And I'm so glad we're living in a world where you can do it all online too, and no one needs to like live where you live to learn from you.
Yes.
So what's your website, and also what's your Patreon URL?
It's laravesta.co is my website, and I can't remember my Patreon. Let me look it up. I think it's Veleda Vesta.
Okay, and I'll put links to all this in the show notes. And I would mention here too, I didn't ask you about your names, about Veleda and Vesta, because you talked about them in the Starseed Survival podcast, really in depth. And I want to send people there because that was just such a great interview too. And I loved hearing about those names and what they mean for you.
Yay. Oh, good. That was really fun. Erin's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think it's Veleda Vesta. It's my internet is being slow. It's one of those like techie funk days.
Yeah.
Having a techie funk day.
Lara and I got started 40 minutes later than we had planned to this morning. And we had to make 3 different Skype calls to get it started, but we did it.
Yeah, we just, let's see. It's almost here.
I'm doing it too. I think it's happening.
Yeah, Lara Veleda Vesta. There we go.
Okay.
Yay!
Okay, Lara Veleda Vesta. Again, links and show notes as always. And thank you. This interview was all I had dreamed and more.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I am just delighted to talk with you. I love you, Amber. You're amazing, and I so value your work.
Oh,
and your community, all of your people are incredible too. I'm so grateful for all of the connections that you are facilitating in your weavings.
Thank you. I agree. I feel like the people who have surrounded me through online writings and sharings, they're the best people on the planet. I don't get weird shit. I don't get like bad vibes from people. Nothing. It's just all good and such interesting, curious, insightful humans. I'm so grateful for that. And I love you too, Lara. Thank you for all the healing and learning that you've brought into my life.
You're so welcome. It is most mutual.
All right. Well, we'll do this again.
Okay, good.
Okay. Thank you for taking these medicine stories in. I hope they inspire you to keep walking the mythic path of your own unfolding self. I love sharing information and will always put any relevant links in the show notes. You can find my blog, handmade herbal medicines, and a lot more at mythicmedicine.love. While you're there, be sure to click the black banner across the top of the page to take my quiz, Which Magical Herb is Your Spirit Plant? It's a fun and lighthearted quiz, but the results are really in-depth and designed to bring you into closer alignment with the medicine that you're in need of. If you love the show, please consider supporting my work at patreon.com/medicine stories. There's some cool rewards there, like exclusive content, free access to my herbal ebook and online course, and the ability to chat with me. I am a crazy, busy, and overwhelmed mom, and adding another project into my life with this podcast is a questionable move, but I'm also so excited about it and just praying that the Patreon will allow me the financial wiggle room to keep doing it. Another way that you can support, if that's not an option, is to head over to iTunes and subscribe and review the podcast. That would be super helpful. Thank you. And thank you to Marie Sue for providing the music that I use. That's Marie with 2 E's, Sioux. This is from her song Wild Eyes, one of my favorites. Check out Marie Sue. Beautiful music. Thank you, and I look forward to next time. Bye.